Secretary will read.
Calendar number 223 by Senator Griffo, Senate Print 1707A, an act to amend Chapter 912 of the laws of 1920.
Senator Griffo, an explanation has been requested by Senator Liz Krueger.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Krueger. I'll be very brief in the explanation. What this essentially does is allow, in the state of New York, the mixed martial arts, which is a combination of wrestling, boxing, and sparring. It is now in place in 45 other states. It would place within the New York State Athletic Commission the responsibility for regulating the events and the participants to ensure safety and ring inspections and medical examinations.
Senator.
Thank you. Mr. President, if through you the sponsor would please yield.
Senator Griffo, do you yield?
I do.
He yields.
Thank you. Would mixed martial arts, as approved in this bill 1707A, actually result in fighters in this sport having to, being protected under federal and state laws to avoid exploitive and coercive promoter contracts, ensure that mixed martial arts fighters enjoy outside the ring protection from unscrupulous promoters, and basically parallel protections for boxers under federal law?
It's my understanding, Senator Krueger, that many of these fighters are covered. They are under contract by the organization, and there are a number of organizations. Much as Kleenex may be a brand name for tissue, the UFC is one brand name for mixed martial arts. And under this, it is my understanding that they are afforded the same outside the ring protections, in many cases have better policies that are put in place as a result of their contracts to ensure and to satisfy any health concerns or issues that may be associated with an event. And I'm not aware, it is similar and mirrors what is done in professional boxing relative to promoters engaging in contracts. So I'm not aware of anything that would be significantly different than already exists within some of the professional sports that, such as boxing.
Mr. President, if through you the sponsor would continue to yield.
Senator Griffo, do you yield?
Yes.
Senator yields.
It's my understanding that there is actual federal law, what's called the Ali Act, passed in 2000, named after
Excuse me, Senator. Can we please have some order in the House? Can we take the conversations out of the chamber? Senator Smith, Senator Oppenheimer, and the gentleman between you, please. Can we take it outside, please? Thank you. Senator Krueger.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, 11 years ago, Congress enacted the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act, which does protect boxers from exploitive, oppressive, and unethical business practices in an industry that lacked a central body to establish standard business practices and in an athletes union to negotiate collective bargaining agreements. My understanding is that this bill, and then later on in 2003, New York State passed similar legislation applying to the state boxing. My understanding is no parallel protections would be applied if mixed martial arts were to become legal in our state. Are you not concerned about the record of violence and injury to fighters that have been well documented in the sport?
Well, I think, Mr. President, through you, Senator Krueger, I think that we're always concerned about the safety of the participants as well as the fans. And I think that's one of the significant aspects of this bill, is that we understand and appreciate and respect the New York State Athletic Commission and want to ensure that they will be regulating each and every aspect of this. And there have been a number of studies that have been done. In fact, I have a Johns Hopkins study from the School of Medicine that we know that in any sport where you engage in contact, there is a potential for an injury rate, and it was stipulated in that report that the injury rate in MMA competitions is compatible with other full contact sports, and there's a very extensive report that talks about the efforts and things that go with the regulation of the sport to protect against those industries. But the basic conclusion of Johns Hopkins was that this sport is in no way, even though there may be an impression based on the appearance of the matches, but overall the report from Johns Hopkins shows that the actual incidence of injury is not higher in this case.
Mr. President, on the bill.
Senator Krueger on the bill.
I guess we could have dueling readings of reports. My reading of reports does not show a finding that this is not a more dangerous sport than many others, but most of my concern is that we shouldn't be encouraging, by legalization, a sport that actually has as a requirement to do the most damage possible. Research shows that there has been an undercount of the violence from this sport. Various studies have measuring the power of the punches applied in mixed martial arts upon a downed opponent called ground and pound, that the punching power can be 910 kilos of force. Studies have shown that there is a under-reporting of damage done to fighters in the sport in the media. Ultimate fighting, being a fairly new phenomena, does not have as much of a documented record of injury and death of boxing because it's not as popular, it's not as long-term as far as having a history, and not nearly as many people participate in mixed martial arts as in boxing. But a recent article titled "When Broadcasters Fail to Show the True Picture" in Sports Illustrated reports on how promoters and broadcasters constantly hide the results of vicious knockouts and other newsworthy events in order to sanitize the violence of ultimate fighting. Efforts by promoters to hide the danger of the sport's also been reported on ESPN. Quote, a school of thought that the ultimate fighting, it's UFC, I'm not sure what the ST stands for, one moment. The organization. The UFC controls its telecast so fans will lose sight of the true nature of the physical damage being done. Some 13 deaths have been reported prior to the organization of the sport into current franchises, and the establishment of current rules don't allow the reported violence and outcomes of the harm and even the deaths to be confirmed. Organized professional fights occurred in October 2007 when Sam Vasquez died in Houston, Texas from brain damage suffered in a bout, and Douglas Dedge's death in 1998 in the Ukraine was also reported in the Times. Of course, Ultimate Fighting, if it had a longer history, would show more results of violence and long-term brain damage and death. I think one of the things that disturbs me most in comparing the rules of Ultimate Fighting with, say, the rules of boxing, which it's frequently compared to, is that in boxing there's a skill set that is measured in order to determine who is the winner and who is the loser of the bout. And sometimes the outcome is, in fact, a knockout punch, or the harm done to either boxer. But in Ultimate Fighting, the measurement of the success of the bout is primarily knockout or submission, the amount of damage done to the opponent, the ground control, meaning continuing to hit and do harm to the opponent when on the ground, the takedown and the takedown's defense, and the level of aggressiveness displayed in the fight. I know that we live in a society filled with violence. I know that children watch violence every day on TV. They can see the violence. They are already replicating the violence by performing attempts at mixed martial art bouts on the streets and in playgrounds. I just don't believe that this state, at this time, should legalize this sport, which by definition gives a good housekeeping seal of approval to the sport as it exists today. I don't think we should pass a law that would allow ultimate fighting to take place in our state without even the standards and protections and rules that are mandated by federal and state law for the sport of boxing. I don't think it is worth the few $1,000,000 in tax revenue. I know we are supposed to stand here and talk about how critical all tax revenue is, but I think you have to balance the psychological and physical impact on our children and ourselves as a society here in New York State by, if we were to support and encourage the legalization of a sport that clearly intends to make money off of the perception of extreme violence and the actual practice of extreme violence and extreme harm of between the two men in the ring. Perhaps there's women's mixed martial arts, so I shouldn't be sexist. So the two people in the ring, I would have just as much concern about female mixed martial arts as I have male mixed martial arts. I simply think New York should be proud of the fact that we have not allowed legalization up to this point and continue to prevent this sport from being practiced legally for fundraising, for money-making purposes in the state of New York, unless and until we establish very strict guidelines about what activities will be recognized and permitted in the ring and what protections, both in contracts and promotion, and on behalf of fighters who some people I know will stand up and say they're choosing to go into the ring. They're choosing to participate in the sport. Why should you, Liz Kruger, say they shouldn't have the right to do it? Well, we as legislators endlessly, day in, day out, make tough decisions about what activities we're going to recognize as legal or illegal or approved. I don't believe the state of New York at this time should make legal and approve formal mixed martial arts in our towns. Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be voting now.
Any other senator wish to be heard on the bill? Senator Parker.
I'm actually rising to support this bill. As many of you know, I carried this bill last year, and I want to thank Senator Griffo for his leadership and making sure that this bill comes to the floor. I think that there's some misunderstandings about this sport, about how it's developed and where we are today. I think some of the things that you've heard characterized were absolutely correct at the beginning of the sport. What's happened over time is that the sport has evolved and has taken up a lot more safeguards. And so what you might have saw, if any of you watched and you saw like K1 fighting, those things, what you saw there is not what you see here. Some of the shoot fights that you may see in Japan, what you see there is not what you see here. There's a lot more safeguards. Part of the numbers that you were hearing Senator Kruger talk about, why they stopped at 2007 is that's when the new safeguards were actually put into play to make the sport more in line to what we see now in boxing. And so you don't see the kind of injuries and even the kind of violence that you once saw in the sport. And so I think under those old circumstances, I would not be standing here asking my colleagues to vote for this bill. But I think under the new rules, I think that we certainly are seeing something that's worth us doing. I want to repeat some of the things I said last year when I spoke on the bill, because again, if we're going to talk about violence in sports and the effect on our young people in particular, we ought to have some consistency. And if we're going to, in fact, ban mixed martial arts, then we ought to ban football. We ought to ban hockey. We ought to ban baseball. There's a lot more injury, and we ought to ban boxing, because there's certainly more injuries, frankly, in all of those sports than what you currently see in mixed martial arts. In fact, the vast majority of mixed martial arts bouts are ended by submission. and because they ended primarily by submission, this sounds kind of counterintuitive, but because it ends in submission as opposed to knockout, a submission is actually long-term less injurious to an opponent than a knockout, which when you literally knock somebody out, what you're doing is literally rattling their brain so that the person loses consciousness, right? And which is what you see, again, in boxing quite often. What you see in hockey a great deal. They have two rules in hockey fights. Drop your equipment, and you can't hit once the person's on the ground. That's it. Other than that, you're all in, right? That's something very different than what I think we want to promote. What we've seen in baseball over the last couple of weeks, we just had a Yankee outfielder who got a concussion last night. We had another baseball player who has gotten hit with a pitch 4 times in his last 6 at-bats, right? 2 of them were headshots, right? And so I don't see us trying to ban baseball. In regards to safety also, the Journal of Sports Science Medicine found that through MMA, fighters sustained half as many knockouts as boxers and thus fewer brain injuries. According to the NFL, there were 154 concussions in 2010 regular season. And that's 21% over the 127 concussions during the same span in 2009. And that's a jump of 34% from the 115 reported concussions through the 8th week of 2008. So something like, again, we're going to talk about injuries and concussions and violence and collisions. You see a lot more in the NFL. And I'm certainly not, there's no bigger NFL fan in here than I am, and I'm certainly not talking about banning it. But what I'm saying is that mixed martial arts has a lot less injuries than what you see in something like the NFL, which, again, we watch all of the time. In hockey, I know there's a few hockey fans in here, Senator Kennedy, 44%, and we love the Sabres, right? 44% of the roughly 80 reported concussions this season came from legal hits. Legal hits. So we're not even talking about fights, right? That's a whole separate, legal hits. 80% are coming with legal hits. So we're seeing concussions all of the time. And let me just say, I talked about baseball a little bit before. They're not nearly taking it really as serious in baseball. But more than a quarter of the 261 catchers, there's 261 catchers in the major leagues, and more than a quarter of them report suffering concussions, right? So again, injuries are an inherent part of this sport, of sports, period. And they are less in mixed martial arts than you see in some of the major sports like football, like baseball, like hockey. We're behind every other state. So when you talk about national trends, I'm not asking us to do something that no one else has done. 40 states, that's 90% of the states in the country have already made MMA legal. And when you're making it legal, we're not simply just saying permit it, we're also creating safeguards. So if you don't like the safeguards, right, we're the legislature. We could actually pretend that we have some control over sporting in this state, and we can actually add more safeguards. And I'm happy to have that discussion and be engaged. I'm certainly sure that Senator Griffo is happy to be in those conversations about creating safeguards that further protect people participating in MMA in the state of New York. But we can't ignore the economic impact of this sport. Upstate, every time that you did an MMA event in Buffalo, Senator Kennedy, or in Syracuse, Senator DeFrancisco, or in Rochester, Senator Roebuck, you're talking about $5.2 million per event. That's a lot of revenue for places upstate that are struggling. In New York City, $11.3 million per bout. Sorry, per event, not per bout, per event. So every time you have an event, New York City would be able to bring in $11.3 million. This is so profitable right now, Mr. President, that people are holding the events in New Jersey and having the press conferences in Times Square in New York City. So New York residents are already viewing it. It's on cable, it's on television, right? So we're not really safeguarding the public from it by not allowing it. All we simply are is, one, over-responding to, what I believe are irrational fears, and that they're not substantiated by the science. And two, throwing away millions of dollars in economic opportunity that certainly could be coming to the state of New York. I'm asking you to vote yes, because there's an opportunity for us to both do something that's good economically for the state of New York and at the same time regulate a sport that, in fact, is safe already, but even could be safer with the wisdom and adroit guidance of this body. Thank you.
Senator Grisanti.
I want to thank Senator Parker for having those statistics. It's 45 states, not 40, that actually have it. I want to thank Senator Griffo for bringing this bill to the floor. One of the things that you got to remember with regards to mixed martial arts is that the respect of the opponents that are in the ring is what actually drives this particular sport. They are trained in either karate, they are trained in wrestling, they are trained in boxing, which makes them, by fighting their opponent, less likely to create injury. They know where to strike, they know where to hit, they don't want to cause a damage such as boxing may cause, or football or hockey when you're having a fight. As far as the safety factor goes, the risk of injury, as Senator Parker pointed out, is far, far less than any other sport that is out there. The next fight for MMA, actually at the Rogers Center, sold 55,000 tickets in a couple hours for a total of $11 million. Toronto's only an hour and a half from Buffalo. That's $11 million that Buffalo's losing in economic benefit, not to mention benefits regarding restaurants, hotels. There's taxes that are brought to New York State. There's fees and permits, there's taxes that we get to collect in this state. So the safety factor, I believe, has been shown. It is safe. The economic development, you can't ignore. The money that's being brought to this state, you cannot ignore that either. I vote in the affirmative for this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Are there any other senators wishing to be heard?
Senator Smith.
Senator Smith.
Very much, Mr. President. I rise just to briefly congratulate my colleague, Senator Griffo. This has been a long time coming. You've heard the statistics that Senator Parker enunciated, as well as Senator Grisanti, and I would just hope my colleagues recognize the importance of the sport. I know we have a couple of our champions that are here sitting on the sidelines, not always sitting on the sidelines, but stand up so they can see what mixed martial arts looks like. And it was good to see you today. So, Mr. President, I will be enthusiastically voting yes for Senator Griffo's bill.
Are there any other senators wishing to be heard? Seeing none, debate is closed. Can we ring the bell?
Center defense.
Are we all here?
Mr. President,
Senator Libous.
are we on the roll call yet?
We haven't called the roll yet.
Are we going to be calling the roll momentarily?
We are going to be calling the roll instantaneously.
Instantaneously. Thank you. At this time, instantaneously, could we call the roll?
Can we have a reading of the last section, please?
Section 6, this act shall take effect on the 90th day.
Call the roll.
Adams, DeFrancisco, Libous, Sampson, Skelos, Zeldin.
To explain his vote, Senator Adams.
I'm going to vote for this bill. I think it's long overdue that we bring mixed martial arts here to the state for several reasons. I think Senator Parker raised a good point on how, in order to ensure safety in sports, we must bring sports out of the shadows and into the professional arena. And I think that it's clearly the sport has evolved to the level that it's time to bring it to the state of New York, and I'm hoping others will see that as well. So I'll be voting aye, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Adams. It will be recorded in the affirmative. Senator DeFrancisco to explain his vote.
Yes, I'm going to vote aye on the mixed martial arts bill. I just think the reasoning is inescapable. The public wants this type of activity. The public has this type of activity in 45 states. We in the state of New York are fighting with budget problems, and we're ignoring the ability not only to please people who want to see these activities or see these mixed martial art events, and we're losing the revenue. So it seems to me that it's a smart thing to do, it's the right thing to do, and lastly, it'll be regulated in the state of New York when it begins and when this mixed martial art events actually start happening. So to me, it's a very easy step to vote yes. It's logical, and it's the right thing to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeFrancisco. You will be recorded in the affirmative. Senator Zeldin to explain his vote.
I rise in the affirmative in favor of this bill. First, I want to commend Senator Griffo for his leadership. I think that maybe he deserves his own championship belt with the way that he has rallied support to this cause over the weeks and months since I've been in office. Mixed martial arts, it's time for it to come to New York. I'm proud to be part of its effort today to legalize it here. I could see Madison Square Garden being filled up with contests, creating jobs, generating revenue, whether it's Western New York, Upper New York, down in the city and elsewhere. I think of staff members that are probably pretty excited right now as they watch me advocating on behalf of mixed martial arts. I think of people throughout the 3rd Senate District in Long Island, many my age, who have become big fans, and now we've made a step in the right direction. Once again, congratulations, Senator Griffo. You've done a lot to bring it to this point.
Senator Zeldin will be recorded in the affirmative. Please announce the results.
In relation to calendar 223, those recorded in the negative are Senators Bonasek, Breslin, Diaz, Farley, Fuschillo, Hannan, Huntley, L. Kruger, Lanza, Laval, Marcelino, Oppenheimer, Perkins, Ranzenhofer, Salan, Savino, Stewart-Cousins, and Young. Ayes 42, nays 18.
The bill is passed.